Muted.
Right. It's 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I want to say thank you for being here today, and thanks to Steve and BodyTrack for asking me to do a webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about cancer prevention and what we can do to lessen our risk of cancer. Of course, this month is October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So you'll see the pink ribbons everywhere, and that's just a reminder, of course, to do the screening we need to, and us ladies to get the mammograms that we need to, and certainly that's important. But there are also things as far as lifestyle habits that we can do to not only protect against breast cancer, but all types of cancer. And that's why you see that ribbon on your screen that has not just pink for breast cancer, but every type of cancer. So everything we're going to talk about today has to do with all types of cancer. And I want to, ask you to engage as much as possible. Please ask questions. I don't want to just be the only one talking this whole time. So I love to have questions, and I'm happy to answer any of them. So I think you just raise your hand. You'll have to kind of bear with me because this is my first time using this webinar technology, so hopefully it'll go smoothly. But I think if you just raise your hand, then I should be able to see your question and I can get it answered. So let's get started. Maybe. All right, so here we go. A lot of us have an idea about cancer that it's just something that sort of happens to us, or it runs in our family, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And fortunately, over the past 30 years, experts have found that that idea or that notion is incorrect, that actually we have a lot of control over our risk for cancer. So that's, of course, good news, and it's the lifestyle choices that we make, day in and day out that can have actually a pretty big impact. And we're going to talk about some of those, a few of those statistics actually on this next slide. It's estimated that 65% of all cancers, or about 1 million of the cancers diagnosed in 2015, might not have occurred at all if we had just changed our diet a little bit, moved a little more, and never used tobacco, either smoking or any other types of tobacco. So although it's easy, to say that, well, I'll just change the way I eat or move a little bit more or not smoke, of course, those, depending on each individual, can be, hard habits to change. So we're going to talk about today how we can impact those things and what it is we need to be focusing on. So I thought what we would do is start out with a little quiz just to kind of test where you are individually with how you're eating and your lifestyle habits and how it's impacting your own cancer risk. So let's go to question 1. And if you would, while you are answering these questions, just jot down, you'll see on, say, for instance, this first question, there's a 1, 2, or 3 next to each of the answers. If you would just jot down, grab a piece of paper and a pen, and jot down the number of the answer that you give for each one. And then at the end, we'll add them all up, and you can kind of gauge where you are. So let's start with that first question. Breakfast is usually 1, egg white omelet and sausages, 2, a muffin and orange juice, or 3, a bowl of oatmeal or cereal with fresh or dried fruit. All right, I'll give you a minute. All right, moving on to the second. Thinking about the amount of meat in your diet, do you, number 1, always include a large portion of red or processed meat with your meal? Number 2, have a medium-sized portion of red or processed meat 5 or more times per week? Or number 3, usually fill at least 2/3 or more of your plate with plant foods, veggies, beans, fruits, that sort of thing, and 1/3 or less with lean meat. All right, let's move on. That third question, if you think about the meals and snacks you've eaten over the past week, your plant foods, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans have included, number one, less than 10 different kinds. And these questions, sometimes we don't even, aren't really aware, so it might take you a minute just to kind of think about, how many have I eaten, or how many different kinds have I eaten? So some of eating better, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is just about becoming more aware of what we're putting on our plate and what we're grabbing when we're on the go and that sort of thing. So anyway, number one, less than 10 different kinds. Number two, 10 to 20 different kinds. Or number three, more than 20 different types of these plant foods. All right, I'll give you a moment. All right, number four, you eat takeout or fast food. One, almost every day. Two, a few times a week. Or three, occasionally as a treat. All right, next one, the number of portions of fruit and vegetables you have in a typical day is one or less, two, between 2 and 4, or 3, 5 or more. And sometimes people get confused with that one on portions. A portion is a small piece of fruit or a half a cup of fruit, a half a cup of cooked vegetables, or a cup of leafy greens. So that gives you some idea of what, I know I get asked that by clients a lot. So, all right, so add up your numbers, if you will, and if you'll take a moment and just, you should be able to comment and let me know how you did. I'd love to see what, the people on the call and where you are as far as these numbers go. And I'll kind of wait and see if I get anybody responding. Okay, I got an 11. Anybody else? I'll wait. Anybody? Come on. All right, so if you add up your numbers, if you add up your numbers, if you look at, hopefully you did that, and if not, you might take a minute and kind of go back and think about those questions and where you are individually with each of those. But, oh, I got a 4, so we've got sort of, middle of the road, and then we've got, in the lesser category. So 5 or less, it's time to kind of, I'm really glad you're here, and I'm glad you're listening in, and it's, if you can start to make some healthy changes, then that's awesome. The 6 to 11 category, if you scored there, you're doing pretty good overall. Certainly, a little wiggle room for improvement, which is really the case for most of us, right? Nobody's perfect, and there's always room for improvement. And if you're at 12 or above, then you're doing great. You're doing excellent, and you're making a lot of healthy choices. So, in the end, I'm glad everybody is here, and I hope today's webinar can kind of shed some light on, what we can do to kind of control our risk and lessen our risk of cancer. I did want to mention, too, and I forgot to mention when we started, that up for grabs today, if you'll kind of stick with me till the end, I have a $50 Visa gift card that's available. So what I'll do is, once we get done, I'll ask a question and put it out to y'all, and the first person who can answer that question will win a $50 Visa gift card. So thanks to BodyTrack for doing that, and I promise my question won't be too crazy hard, but might challenge you just a little bit and make you think about what we've talked about. So what I have on your screen right now is the American Institute for Cancer Research. You might have heard of them, you might not have, but they are a group of expert panelists that sort of review all the studies involved with cancer exhaustively and look at what we need to be doing in regards to cancer and prevention. They do this, I think it's about every 5 or 10 years. And so last year, actually, the end of 2015, they came up with some new recommendations. So we're going to go through sort of each of these and talk about what we can do to have an impact. So you'll see get lean, avoid sugary drinks, eat a more whole food, plant-based, nutrient-rich diet, which is a mouthful, but we'll talk more about that and what that looks like. Be more mindful with your meat. So we're going to talk about meat and what kinds are maybe put you a little more risk than others. Cut back on salt, which a lot of times we can associate that. I think we all sort of know that salt impacts blood pressure and possibly heart disease, but sometimes it's a little more difficult to relate it to cancer. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. And drink in moderation, which I know can be a touchy subject, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. And supplements, and there was a big one for a lot of people. A lot of times we think, we hear a study or we hear, in the media something about one nutrient or another, and we think if a little bit is good, then a lot must be better. And if we can just isolate the one, then of course it's going to protect us, but we're going to talk about why that might not be a good idea in the end. So, and then number 8, be physically active, which obviously many of y'all are, still into Body Track and involved there, which is a great step in the right direction, but we're going to talk about that a little more. And then we'll just briefly touch on those last 2 points. All right, so that first one, get lean. So that can be a big one, right? When we think about weight loss, losing weight can be challenging. And so, but what we do know is that weight, and whether you're overweight or obese, that does put you at increased risk for cancer. So, and you'll see all those, I'm not going to read out all those cancers, but those are what we find that people who are obese are at increased risk for. So many different types of cancer. So of course, and I think it's easy too to associate, when we think about food, we tend to think about just the weight on the scale, that little number that tends to drive us crazy, or the way we look in the mirror, or the way our clothes fit, which of course are markers. But when we start to think about the bigger picture, how our weight affects, our risk of heart disease, or like for instance here, our risk for cancer. So it becomes a little bigger than just that number on the scale, or how we look in the mirror. So hopefully that can kind of encourage you a little bit to focus there. And we're going to talk about getting lean or weight loss, and I'm sure I'll touch on it in future webinars. But that's sort of a big subject that could be a webinar all its own. But I have in these next few slides just a few ways that you can make an impact and start to think about how can I take some of the weight off that I have. So that first point, become more aware of the foods you're eating. Awareness is huge. So many of us, like I mentioned earlier, are not even really thinking about the foods that we eat, and it's not so much about the calories. It's not only about that. Of course, quantity and the calories that we eat is part of it, but that's not the only part. And we're going to talk about, so it's quantity and it's quality too. So it's the types of foods that we're eating that matters too, and the environment that we're eating the foods in. Are we multitasking while we eat? Are we on the computer? Are we watching TV? Are we driving? And how often are we doing all of those things while we're eating instead of just eating? And for so many, I know the clients that I see, I have some questions on the questionnaire that clients fill out before they come to see me. And so many people struggle with, and I think just in our sort of day and age in our society, with multitasking and sort of mindless eating and doing other things while we're eating. So just becoming more aware of the foods that you're eating and the amount is a good first step. Of course, one way to really see that in black and white is keeping a log of, what you're eating, what your portion sizes are, and 2, when you're eating. Another thing to kind of add to that also is hunger and fullness. That's what I spend a lot of time talking to clients about is, a lot of us are not even aware of, when we're actually truly physiologically hungry and then stopping when we're full. So I meet with clients all the time that say, well, oh yeah, I eat all the time and I'm not hungry, So, so just becoming more aware of that and seeing patterns and keeping a log, whether it's, a handwritten log or, of course, there are all sorts of apps and, good programs to keep track of that, like MyFitnessPal is one. But just starting to become more aware of what you're taking in and what that looks like, and really not in a judgmental way. A lot of people will do it and they're hard on themselves, and if you can approach it in sort of just a more curious, open-minded way of just kind of looking at what you're eating and your patterns and how can you gradually make change, then that's a start. That second point, eat good foods that fuel your body more often. That sounds simple, right? But most of the time, what I see with clients and just in talking with people is when people go to lose weight or make changes in the way they're eating, they automatically think, well, I just need to eat less. And we've heard that message, right? We've heard it over and over. Eat less, move more, and you're going to lose weight. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. I guess fortunately and unfortunately. The good thing about it is we actually need to be eating more, that it's more of the right types of foods, the foods that actually fuel our body and give us energy, give us nutrients versus just eating less. And we're going to talk about in a little bit how to eat more nutrient-rich foods and how to actually fill up. I talked to a client yesterday, and she said she had changed her diet at one point. This was several years ago, and she had started eating lean cuisine meals every lunch and every dinner. And she had lost weight, but she said she was starving all the time. And now that she's gone off that plan, because that's inevitable, you're not going to, more than likely going to stick on lean cuisines forever. She said once she tasted real food, it was around the holidays, she was out and she was back to eating real food. But so making sure that you're eating good foods that fuel your body more often. And we even talked about, she and I, with that, if she can even add just a salad, and she's found personally, if she adds a salad along with that lean cuisine, she's, more satisfied, more full. And so, so that's what it's all about, is adding those nutrient-rich foods, the foods we know that are good for us, so that we can actually be satisfied and not starving all the time, because that's no fun and it's not going to last. So eat a good balanced breakfast with some protein every day. So I'm sure every single person on the call has heard that before. That's not, brand new information or a tip you've never heard, but I can't impress enough how important that is. I find it personally with myself, I find it with clients, that morning meal really has a huge impact on the rest of your day. And you think, another client I was talking to was skipping breakfast in the morning in order to skip out on those calories, thinking, okay, I'll miss those calories, then of course I'll lose weight because I'm missing the calories. But what happens when we skip breakfast, we tend to try to make up, even without us even realizing it, we tend to try to make up for those calories later in the evening. So it ends up coming back around. So anytime you can take the time, and I know that can be challenging too. We're busy, we're out the door, it's hard to take the time, but just even starting with that small habit of how can I start to incorporate breakfast, and thinking about balance. When you're planning your breakfast, I see the two things that people do with breakfast is either skip it altogether, or it's a very carb-heavy breakfast, which carbs aren't bad at all, but it's the types of carbs that we're eating, and two, balancing those carbs with other nutrients. So, so trying not to, skip breakfast or have it to be so carb heavy and balancing it with some protein. And that's why I give you some examples there. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, nuts. Both nuts and smoked salmon are great sources of protein and good fat too. So if you can kind of balance, having some carbs, and of course the types of carbs are important. So trying to do whole grains over white carbs, and that's when you can combine those carbs with the protein, that breakfast is going to last longer. And what research shows is we tend to have less cravings later on in the day if we can get that protein in the morning. So, and it's not about overdoing it, and getting crazy amounts of protein. If you can get it through real food, even better, versus shakes and bars and that sort of thing. I find that people sort of rely on those a lot, but the more you can get it through, real food, the better. Okay. Stress is also a big part of stress and sleep, and that's what that next point has to do with. So de-stressing and setting yourself up to get enough sleep. Those two things, I know some people, kind of like to compartmentalize and separate stress and sleep, and that they don't impact, weight, but they absolutely do. When we are stressed, you think about when you're stressed, you don't want, a salad typically or good foods. You want, well, they are good, right? They're not necessarily good for us. So we want sweets and we want comfort type foods when we're stressed. So, that's another thing that I spend time with clients talking about is how to de-stress. And it's always interesting. I ask the question on my questionnaire, do you have coping strategies for stress? And it amazes me how often, people just kind of look at me and they don't. So often people don't have any sort of ways to, to cope with stress. So it's important that you find those, whether it's exercise or talking with a friend or whatever it is. And of course, the sleep impacts hunger and satiety and that sort of thing. So, and you've probably noticed that you go through a night and you don't get a good night's sleep, and then the next day you're starving or you're craving certain, sugary foods or whatever. So sleep and making sure you can get good sleep is important. And then that last point about emotional eating sort of relates to the stress, but as much as you can reach out for help with emotional eating, you are not alone with that. And that's another thing that I see with clients all the time is really struggling with the, eating out of, whether it's stress or loneliness or boredom or any of those things, and just starting to get a handle on that and start to change those habits just gradually. All right. Second point is to avoid sugary drinks. Okay. So every point we're going to talk about sort of going forward relates back to that first point of getting lean. Everything, of course, impacts, our ability to either lose weight or maintain or get to a healthy weight. And sugary drinks are certainly a big part of that. So a lot of our excess calories that we take in comes from the extra added sugar in the drinks that we're drinking. And I think we kind of have gotten it that sodas, and soft drinks aren't the best choice. And so we've seen the numbers of those drinks go down, overall when we look at, how many sodas and soft drinks people are drinking. But we've just, a lot of us have replaced, fortunately a lot of us have replaced them with water and sort of calorie-free beverages. But many of us have just replaced those sodas with bottled teas or coffee. If the line at Starbucks right up the road from my house is any indication, that we're drinking a lot of coffee and a lot of coffee drinks, and there's all the extra additions and the caramel macchiato and all of that that just adds more and more sugar. Sports drinks are another source, the Gatorade. Certainly there's a place for all of that when you're really active, but being aware and mindful how much sugar you're taking in. And smoothies are also, and then fruit juices, which I didn't even add on there, but that's a place too that I talk to clients about a lot, because fruit juice, although it's natural, it's just easy for your body to turn that fruit juice into glucose or sugar in your blood. So trying to cut back on the juice as much as possible, and really in general just thinking about how can you cut back on the calories that you're taking in through drinks. And water, unsweetened drinks are your best choice. For a lot of people, I recommend the sugar-free, like LaCroix waters, and like Target has a brand of their own. But if you like that taste of the soda, then trying to go with one of those drinks. I thought I had a question, sorry. And so switching out, sodas for one of those unsweetened drinks is really your best choice. All right, number 3, add a more whole food, plant-based, nutrient-rich diet. So that's a mouthful. That's a lot of words for just good foods from nature. So not from a bag or a box, but straight from nature. And so the more we can sort of move towards that, the better for our body. So if you've been to the grocery store lately, there are something like 40 to 50,000 products now in the grocery store, and 40 to 50,000 options for us to kind of sift through and try to make choices with. So the more you can hit those outside aisles of the grocery store or the perimeter of the grocery store, the better. That's where you're going to find the more, whole foods, and the more you move in, the more you find the packaged processed stuff. So making that switch is a big part of eating better. And really nutrient-rich, I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but nutrient-rich or nutrient-dense really just has to do with, it's just a term that means foods that have more nutrients as compared to the number of calories. So much of sort of the standard American diet is foods that are full of calories and pretty much devoid of nutrients. So one thing that comes to mind is, coarse fast food, which we get, but so much of the other foods that we eat on a regular basis are foods that really are fairly low in nutrition but really high in calories. So the more we can switch to those nutrient-rich foods, the whole grains, and really looking at whether they're truly whole grains. So I know, for instance, in the bread aisle, I don't know, there are probably 50 different types of bread now that we have to choose from. And so making sure you're reading those labels and paying attention to the ingredients that are in food is important. So looking for 100% whole wheat is key when you're talking about grains, and certainly brown rice and those things. And we'll talk about some other options. Fruits and vegetables are another sort of part of that, and that's just a place where all of us could kind of improve when it comes to that, me included. So, and it really takes a concerted effort to sort of, become aware of how many fruits and vegetables. That's another question on my questionnaire. How many fruits and vegetables are you eating? And people are like, well, I don't know what a serving is, and I'm not really sure. I've never really thought about it. And so really starting to think about, and it's something we've heard all of our lives, right? Eat your fruits and veggies. We know it's important, but what we find is that people just aren't doing it. So the more that we can just become aware of it and start to, focus on making small changes in that area, the better. And then, of course, beans, peas, nuts, seeds, all of those are great nutrient-rich foods too. All right, and I gave you a visual here of what I'm talking about. So here on the left, you have a calorie-rich meal. Some fried chicken, you've got a bunch of white rice, you've got a few veggies sprinkled in, but not a lot. And then if you look at the one on the right, tons of vegetables, a couple times. You've got lots of color there. You've got chicken, but it's not fried. And it looks to me like brown rice versus white rice. So same amount of calories in these two plates, which you might find interesting or surprising, but the same amount of calories, just a completely different sort of makeup when you look at the plate. Okay, here are a couple, hopefully you can see these okay and it's not too blurry, but these are some more examples of that. So you have like some sort of a berry parfait, and if you compare the two, then just by adding nutrition, so increasing, it looks like they increased the berries on the right versus cutting back on maybe banana, which is a little more calorie dense on the left. Not that bananas are bad, that's a question I get a lot, that bananas aren't bad, but they do tend to be a little more calorie dense. So, and it looks like on the one on the right, they've added some yogurt or something like that to the top, which adds protein. So these are just sort of instances. There's a book that I highly recommend if you want to learn more about just this that I'm showing you, these pictures, and how to kind of just increase the nutrient density or nutrient richness of your diet, and it's called The Volumetric Plan, I think is what it's called, and it is by Barbara Rolls. I had to look for the book. But, so it's Volumetric, and it's by Barbara Rolls. And just a great book with all sorts of recipes in the back that show you how to incorporate, more nutrient richness, so that you do exactly what I was talking about earlier, not just eating less, actually eating more, but eating better. And what ends up happening is you're more satisfied, you're more satisfied longer, which doesn't leave you constantly hungry and looking for the next meal. All right, this is a picture of healthy eating plate. This is the Harvard healthy eating plate. You might have seen the USDA My Plate. And, just making, and I use this a lot in teaching clients, just to start to think differently about how their plate is designed. When they're making their plate, does it look anything like this? And for a lot of people, unfortunately, most of us are missing that whole left side of the plate. We have a huge, portion of, and it's not whole grains, it's mostly white stuff for many of us, and then a big portion of protein, and maybe it's more red meat and that sort of thing. So just starting to kind of think about how can I maybe include a few more vegetables on my plate, or what whole grain have I never tried that I might be able to incorporate. So just starting to make little changes, and that's exactly what I do with people, is just work with them just to gradually make change. A lot of us, when we go to make change or want to lose weight or whatever it is, we think we have to do everything or nothing, and that's that all or nothing thinking, which leads to sort of losing weight and gaining weight and that sort of thing, back and forth in this kind of yo-yo that so many of us do. And so the more you can just approach it without that all or nothing thinking, instead thinking, how can I just make maybe 3 small changes? And not only for weight loss, but of course for cancer prevention too. All right, so I thought we'd pause for a second and put a question out to y'all. What's one way, when we talked about nutrient-rich foods and adding, instead of just taking away, but instead adding good foods, what are some ways that you can think of, and I'll kind of read them as you send them in, what are some ways you can think of that you could add nutrient-rich foods to your diet? Oh, okay, I got more nuts. Perfect, and nuts are, add veggies. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Okay, more nuts. Add a veggie at a time, that's perfect. So many of us, when we think of fruits and vegetables, we have like 1 or 2 of each that we like, but if you can kind of think outside that box a little bit, and that's what I do with people. I'll give them a long list of all the options that they have, and it's kind of eye-opening to think about, wow, there are like, 40 or 50 different types of vegetables, and I only have tried maybe, a few of those. So the more you can kind of think outside the box, the better. And the nuts are great. I'll go back to that. The nuts are a great source, I think I mentioned earlier, of good fats and protein. So one thing to be careful with nuts, and I think most people know this at this point, but a 1/4 cup of nuts, and it varies just slightly from one type of nut to another. That's a question I get asked a lot. which nuts are better. Are almonds better than walnuts, better than peanuts or whatever? And really, they all have their own little package of goodness. So, but about a quarter cup of nuts has approximately 150 to 180 calories, depending on what type of nut you're talking about. So you just have to be careful. And if you've ever sat down with like a jar of nuts or a can of nuts, you know how easy it is just to, eat half of the can. So it's really important there to have portion control, because although nuts are nutrient rich and full of nutrition, there are a few foods like nuts so high in calories. Avocado is another one. Very nutrient rich, but a lot of calories. So just being aware of that. But those very good suggestions. Anybody else want to chime in? And that's something just to spend a little time thinking about. And that's exactly what I work with people on. It's just to start to think of, okay, how can I make my meals more satisfying? How can I make them more full of nutrition, just in little ways, Let's go back. So for instance, with when you think about balance and you think about this picture that I showed you, how can you add in a fruit with breakfast or a vegetable? For instance, when we do eggs in our house, for my husband and I'll scramble eggs. But first I'll take a handful or two of baby spinach right out of the bag. I don't have to rinse it or mess with it at all. I put it in the pan, let it wilt a little bit, and then I pour my scrambled eggs over it. So then cook it all together, and then I've gotten some leafy greens for the day. Now, would it be really easy just to scramble up some eggs and fry them up and go about my day? Yes. But by taking that just a little bit of time, I mean, it literally takes a minute to let that spinach wilt, then I've added in, just a little bit of nutrition. And of course, it doesn't have to just be spinach. You can do mushrooms or peppers or whatever it is that you like. But that's just sort of one way to sort of add some nutrition to what you're eating. All right, so number 4, be mindful of your meat. So what we do know recently, processed meats were designated as a carcinogen, which sounds really scary, but we do know that there is increased risk. The more processed meat that we eat, and processed meat, like you see on the bottom there, is hot dogs, ham, bacon, sausage, all of those things are considered processed meats. And we do know, and what the AICR found is that, in looking at research, is that the more processed meats we consume, the more our risk of cancer increases. And I believe it's colon cancer specifically is the concern there. So, and as much as that's a bummer, and I hate to be, the dietitian that bears the bad news, because I love bacon and sausage just as much as the next person. Going to Bradley's, if you live in Tallahassee, is one of my favorite things. So it might not be for you. You might not quite be ready to cut it completely out, but just starting to think about how can I maybe eat less, and just having that awareness that we know that there is an increased risk. So maybe you're not eating bacon every day or sausage every day or having hot dogs every weekend, but instead, how could you maybe replace that with a healthier option? And it goes for turkey bacon too. I know a lot of people sort of equate turkey bacon with health. So I have a question too. Let's see. All right, so I got a question from somebody asking, identified and labeled by whom? So if you would, are you talking about the meat and the processed meats, and that was identified as a carcinogen? That's what I'm talking about. You tell me if it's different. And you know what? It was the AICR that came out with this recommendation, and like I said, they're a panel of experts. Yes, I see it. It is meat is a carcinogen. So it was them that determined that meat is a carcinogen. And then above that, I'm not sure where the information came from. Oh, okay, you got it. Okay. So from there, I think what happened is research, and they found that, processed meat is a concern. So, and red meat also has been identified to be a probable carcinogen. So it's not quite as sort of risk-inducing as the processed meat, but is a point of concern. And we already know there's a concern with red meat and increased heart disease. So, or hopefully you know that red meat is higher in saturated fat, and so there is a risk there with increased heart disease. So now there's some thinking that it's a probable carcinogen too. So when we're talking about red meat, I showed this to my husband, and he saw that it was beef, pork, and lamb, and he's like, "Wait, pork's the other, the other white meat." And I'm just relaying what the AICR is sort of identifying what they consider to be red meat: beef, pork, lamb. So, and I know some people, when you look at this, you think, all right, she's taken away every meat there is. What am I going to eat now? But there are lots of other meats and lots of, other choices when you really think about it. So just getting in, like I said earlier, that note of trying to switch out some of your red and processed meats with things like organic chicken or turkey. Beans are a great, plant-based source of protein. Fish is something that a lot of us does, especially cold water fish, which has omega-3 fats, which are good for us, good, heart healthy. And trying to switch, and not just cold water, of course those are good, but also lean fish, grouper, and all the good seafood that we have, especially right here in Florida, living near the ocean. As much as we can try to eat those versus always just go into red meat or processed meat, the better. Just a few, suggestions, especially with, there's a little hint of chilliness in the air this morning, so when you start thinking about making pots of soup or chili, try to think about how can I make those meatless maybe. So for instance, with a chili, making it a 5-bean chili or a chicken chili versus just your standard beef chili. Or grilling chicken or fish, instead of burgers, especially right now with the football season, we tend to automatically go to the burgers or the sausage dogs or whatever it is, but just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit of how can I sort of include some other options, and trying to work in meatless meals as much as as much as you can, or even a little bit. Just making that change so that maybe once or twice a week you're starting to think about, how can I make this? How can I cut back? Maybe use beans instead of meat, or have more veggies. So just getting in that mindset. There's a website, I believe it's called Meatless Mondays, and I'll have to check on it, but there's a lot of information and tips and recipes and that sort of thing to help you kind of, there's a whole campaign about Meatless Monday, and if you Google it, you should be able to find it, but there's, lots of good recipes, and sometimes we get in that rut of thinking, all right, we need our protein, and it's got to be meat, and then we have our veggie and our carb, and I'm all for balance, obviously, like I was already talking about, but just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit when it comes to that protein. All right, cutting back on salt, that's a big one. For a lot of people, I talk to people a lot about that, and like I said, I think earlier, we equate it easily, I think, to high blood pressure and that sort of thing, but I don't think a lot of people equate it to cancer, and it's stomach cancer in particular, that the risk seems to be increased with. So where do we get our salt? Processed stuff, right? Bags and boxes of foods that so many of us have sort of come to rely on, chips, crackers, that sort of thing. Canned foods is another big source of sodium, soup, sauces. Frozen meals are another big one, and then a huge one is eating out. And it's not just fast food, but just eating out in general. At sit-down restaurants, the amount of sodium, if you really start to become more aware of, what's in your food and how much salt, and look up nutrition information, it's truly mind-blowing, even more so, I think, than the calories or fat that's in food. When you start to look at sodium in the foods that we're eating when we eat out, it's amazing. So just being smart about how you order and what's in your food, it is part of it. So I'm not saying never eat out, of course, I enjoy eating out as much as the next person, but I try to order, salad dressing on the side or sauces on the side or less sauce on whatever I'm getting, and that's where you're going to find that you can really make an impact. All right, so including fresh whole foods as much as possible, which I already said, in relation to of course, the whole nutrient-rich foods, but that also has to do with salt. The more packaged, processed stuff we eat, the more salt we're going to get. Eat at home more often, and this I know can be a tough sort of change for a lot of busy families and a lot of busy working people, but just starting to sort of think about how could I maybe just a couple nights a week be prepared so that I'm not eating out and getting stuck and having to order pizza or whatever it is. And that's a lot of what I do with people. Also is helping to plan meals and plan ahead, because that's so much of eating better is just having that plan ahead of time. Reading food labels is a big part of it, and like I said, maybe looking up nutrition information when you're going out. And just so you know, the recommendation for sodium per day is 2,400 milligrams or less. So, and 2,400 milligrams also is about a teaspoon, which seems so small, but that's the recommendation, and that's where our best bet is for decreasing risk of all sorts of chronic diseases, including cancer. So I wanted to just take a minute, and this is a little strange not to have an audience and not be able to engage with y'all, but any questions or comments so far anyone have? I've just got a few more points, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there and give you that opportunity. All right, well, y'all just let me know if you have questions. Alcohol is the next recommendation by the AICR, that we can drink alcohol in moderation, if at all. So we know that alcohol increases risk of cancer, and especially excessive amounts of alcohol. So it's also a big source of calories. So going back to that first point of being lean, so much of, I know talking with clients, alcohol can be a real source of calories. And what happens too when you drink and when you have a little buzz, you tend to not necessarily want healthy foods. You tend to overeat at times and that sort of thing. So that can be the issue there. Moderation is a big part of the recommendation. So 1 drink per day for women, so that's a beer, or I think it's 4-ounce glass of wine, or 2 drinks per day for men is the recommendation. So for some people, not an issue at all. And if you don't drink, of course, there's no recommendation to start, but certainly moderation is a big part of that. All right, so I have a question. I'm going to stop for a second. What do you suggest for someone suffering from severe reflux? Well, that's a sort of a big one. Let's see, it says, I know the 5 C's to try to avoid. Are there any other items to add or delete from your diet? So that's something maybe, I think, I don't know who that is who's posing that question, but that's sort of off the cancer subject, but I'd be happy to, if you want to email me and ask me, I'm going to give you my website at the end, but I'd be more than happy to answer that question at another time. So let's move on to, don't use supplements to protect against cancer. So supplements are a big, a big industry, and a lot of us feel like, well, if they're, say for instance, something comes out in the media where we know that X nutrient is, fights cancer. So then, our tendency as a society is to want to sort of focus on that one and go buy up all the supplements, all the supplements in the store. And instead, really thinking about, it's more about whole foods and, the nutrients as a package in whole foods versus there being a magic pill. Because honestly, there is not a magic pill for anything, unfortunately, as much as I wish there was, but your best source of nutrition is really real food. So as much as you can rely on your diet versus automatically, certainly there's a place for, people who are in need of certain supplements and lacking in certain areas when it comes to that, but in general, trying to rely more on real foods than supplements. All right, so number 8, being physically active is a big part also of cancer prevention. So moving our bodies is about so much more than just calorie burn. So for many of us, when they're talking to clients, we automatically equate calorie burn to exercise to just being about calorie burn, but it's about far more than that. And this is just a part of a list of all the benefits of being active. So aside from cancer prevention, you've got all of these other benefits. And so the list goes on and on. Y'all are part of BodyTrack, so you're already, moving in the right direction with that. I encourage you to use those memberships, and Steve and all the staff at BodyTrack are great in encouraging people, and we know for sure that activity can help reduce our risk of all types of chronic diseases. Let me see if I have another question here. All right. Okay, so what we do know is activity can help keep certain cancer risk increasing hormones at a healthy range, and it helps to boost our body's immunity, which is just our body's defense mechanism for fighting off disease. So the more we're active, the more our bodies are able to fight off those carcinogens and that risk. So, and what I talk with people all the time about is really truly finding what you enjoy and sticking with that. So if you're not someone who loves to run, then don't be a runner, but find what it is that you really enjoy. I tried to run at one point. I did a half marathon, and I hated every minute of it. And granted, a lot of people love it, more power to you, but it just wasn't my thing. And so I started playing tennis around that time, and that's, I love it. So I really encourage you to find what it is that you truly enjoy, because otherwise it's going to be that much harder to stick with it. All right. So the last 2 recommendations on the list that the AICR put out were for new moms to breastfeed exclusively for up to 6 months, and then it's to introduce foods to infants, and then that number 10 is after treatment. Cancer survivors should follow the recommendations for cancer prevention. So we won't spend a lot of time there, but just so you know what those are. So lifestyle, of course, habits absolutely do have an impact on our ability to prevent cancer. So it isn't something that just happens to us. We can, have an impact. So which habit do you think you could start with? Is there an area maybe that we talked about today that you might be able to make a change in? You might pick 1 or 2 areas. I mentioned the whole all or nothing thinking. So many people jump in with both feet when they're ready to make change, but what tends to happen is you get overwhelmed, or it's just too much to stick with or sustain. And so, most people can't stick with it long term, but if you can just pick a couple, even 1 or 2 small, doable, practical goals to work on, then that's a huge start. All right. So who wants to win a $50 Visa gift card? All right, the first person to type in their answer and get it back to me wins. Name 3 of the recommendations for preventing cancer. Go. Somebody's quick. All right, we got avoid processed foods, reduce salt, and avoid sugary drinks. Eat more plant-based foods. It looks like, Bridget. Oh, and Bridget has her hand up. I wonder. Oh, and you've had your hand up the whole time, Bridget. I didn't even see it. Oh, you just put your hand down. All right, so I think Bridget is the winner. So Bridget Hauck, I think is your name. So hopefully Steve can get with you, and he will get your $50 gift card to you. All right, so just to review real quick, these are, the 10 recommendations. Get lean, avoid those sugary drinks, eat more of those nutrient-rich foods, start to think about your meat and how you might change it up a little bit, cut back on salt, drinking in moderation. So maybe not cutting it out altogether, but just thinking about moderation, thinking about those supplements and not necessarily relying on those, being active, and then those last two for breastfeeding mothers and cancer survivors. Oops, I thought I had one more slide that has my information. So let me see. All right, here we go. So thank y'all very much for being here today. I appreciate your time, and thanks again to Steve and BodyTrack for letting me provide information for y'all today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. If you want to, I have a website. It's AnnaJonesRV.com. And it's not just a stagnant website, it's a blog, and I try to update and write blogs every week or two or so. So feel free to go check that out, and if you'd like to follow and have my blog directly emailed to you, then I would love that. And also you can follow me on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, please join me there, and I post not only my blogs go straight there, but also other information. Right now, I just started a 31-day meditation challenge for myself, and I put it out to others. That's something, a habit that I've been sort of working on and trying to improve on and make part of my life. So I thought I would put myself to the challenge and try to do it daily for the month of October. So if you're at all interested, then please come join me. Thank you so much, and I hope you'll have a great day.